The girl who looked up Elise Hart was the kind of woman you might pass on the street without a second glance, quiet, modest, and fond of wide-brimmed hats and hand-me-down cardigans. But underneath that gentle exterior burned a fire hot enough to melt steel? A simple woman? Maybe, but only if you mistook simplicity for smallness. And Elise's heart was never small, not in dreams, not in spirit. She was born in the sleepy farming town of Coalridge, nestled between the dusty Kansas plains and the kind of sky that begged you to chase it. Her parents, Eula and Gordon Hart, ran the town's only hardware store, a place that smelled like oil, wood shavings, and childhood memories. Elise grew up with sawdust under her fingernails and ambition in her eyes. From as early as she could remember, Elise had a thing for the sky. Not just clouds and birds and weather. No, she had a love affair with the idea of flying. As a child, while other girls were braiding each other's hair or pretending to be princesses, Elise was lying on her back in the fields, identifying aircraft by their silhouette Cessnas, Piper Cubs. The occasional F-16s slicing through the atmosphere like a hot knife through margarine. She called them her sky dancers. Every time one flew overhead, she'd pause and stare, her heart racing like a stampede. It wasn't about the machines. It was about freedom. It's about defying gravity. It's about proving that even a girl from Coalridge could matter in a sky dominated by noise and giants. But dreams don't always come with instructions. And sometimes the world folds its arms and says, not for you. The first rejection at 19, she saved up enough from cleaning houses, stocking shelves, and fixing leaky faucets around town to apply for a spot at a private flight school near Wichita. Her application was polite, humble, and glowing with potential. The rejection letter was shorter than the application form. We regret to inform you that your application has not been successful. Due to the competitive nature of our program and the need for a demonstrated background in aviation, we cannot offer you a place at this time. But Elise could read between the lines. She didn't have a pilot in the family. She didn't come from money. She wasn't a veteran or a science prodigy. And let's be real, she wasn't a he. What Coalridge thought? A town where the highest ambition was managing the new dollar depot or marrying someone who did. Elise's dream was ... weird. Flying planes, folks would say at the post office, or diner. That's not really ... for women, is it? You're sweet, Mrs. Hobbins, her church choir director once said after Elise shared her goal. But you know, pilots have to be strong and decisive and, not get emotional. Elise smiled. But inside, her heart shattered like a dropped porcelain mug. Still, she wasn't the type to wallow. She was the type to build her own runway. Enter the F-47 now. Let's pause and address the turbocharged elephant in the hangar. Yes, the F-47. If you're thinking, wait, wasn't the F-47 a World War II, a fighter plane? You're not wrong. But this wasn't that F-47. This was the Future 47. A modern experimental aircraft developed by an up-and-coming indie aerospace firm known as Zephyrotech. The company had issued an open challenge. They were looking for a non-traditional pilota, a fresh pair of wings to test their prototype's versatility, an AI-assisted piloting system. Their tagline? We don't want the best. We want the unexpected. Elise stumbled across the ad while repairing a ceiling fan in Mr. Granger's living room. He had left the flyer on the coffee table. She picked it up to move it, and the word unexpected practically lit up like a neon sign. Heart pounding, she applied. Training denied. Again her resume? Sparse flight hours? Zero confidence. Through the roof? Zephyrotech responded politely but firmly. While we appreciate your enthusiasm, our program is built around candidates with at least 150 logged flight hours or military aviation training. We encourage you to reapply in the future. That should have been it. End of story. Dream deferred, shelved, or worse, abandoned. But Elise, she wasn't interested in the usual flight path. The garage revolution 3 days later. She drove her dad's rusted-out Chevy pickup to the abandoned barn behind their store. It had housed hay bales, rusty tools, and a family of squirrels for over a decade, but to Elise, it looked like a hangar. She rigged together a simulator from an old gaming PC, an Xbox joystick, and spare radio parts. Then she downloaded open-source flight software and built herself a cockpit using scrap wood and duct-taped every night for 6 months. She trained. She watched YouTube tutorials until her eyes hurt. She learned aircraft mechanics from dusty library books. She emailed retired Air Force pilots, offering to mow their lawns or walk their dogs in exchange for a conversation. And slowly, clumsily, beautifully, she taught herself to fly. The break threw her. Big break came not through fate, but through a guy named Chuck. Chuck Peterson was a retired air traffic controller who came into the hardware store every other week for nails and conversation. Elise helped him fix a busted bird feeder once, and he returned the favor by offering her a few hours in his ancient but functional Cessna. She took to it like a bird, remembering it had wings. "Damn," Chuck said after their second flight. "You're like a whisper in the air." One more try armed with actual flight hours and a new demo video she recorded from Chuck's GoPro. Elise sent another application to Zephyr-Tech, this time with a video essay titled, "What the Sky Means to Me." In the clip, her voice trembled. A little, but her message was clear. "I'm not a trained fighter pilot. I didn't go to an academy. But I know how to fall and stand back up. I know how to turn rust into wings. I was born on the ground, but I was built for the sky." A week later, she got a call. Not a letter, not an email. A call from Zephyr-Tech's director of operations. "We'll give you one shot." She was invited to a 3-day trial program for non-traditional applicants. No guarantees, just a shot. For most people, that would be terrifying. For Elise Hart, that was fuel. The girl who looked up was about to rise. The test of turbulence. The road to Zephyr-Tech's testing site wasn't paved with gold. It was paved with gravel, potholes, and a healthy serving of Elise Hart's sweat. The location was deliberately remote, an old military airstrip outside Flagstaff, Arizona, with a backdrop of crimson cliffs and endless desert skies. Zephyr-Tech wasn't just trying to keep things quiet for secrecy's sake. They were looking for a proving ground, a place where no signal interference could mess with their cutting-edge tech and, frankly, where no one would notice if something exploded. The airstrip was guarded by more than just barbed wire and keypads. There was a kind of unspoken challenge hanging over the place, as if it dared every new arrival to prove they even deserved to stand on its tarmac. Elise drove through the gates in her clunky old pickup, still with one cracked side mirror and a rust spot on the hood that looked suspiciously like Elvis Presley if you squinted right. She wore her best flannel shirt, still smelled faintly of motor oil, a pair of boots that had seen better days, and a heart thumping like a war drum. As she stepped out, she saw them. The other candidates. There were 12 in total, and she didn't need a spreadsheet to know she was the odd one out. Most of them had military build-style gaits, clean haircuts, and the kind of posture that screamed, "I've ejected from a jet before breakfast." Others were engineering wunderkinds mighty grads who spoke in acronyms and quoted Isaac Newton the way some people quote Bible verses. Elise. She had a box of cinnamon rolls, a strong handshake, and a quiet resolve that could have bent steel. They were led by a woman named Commander Janice Rourke, a retired Navy pilot with silver-streaked hair and an expression like she hadn't smiled since Y2K. She was not here to coddle. She was here to separate the dreamers from the doers, and, if you didn't know the difference, we're already on the wrong side of the runway. "Welcome to Zephyr-Tech's Future 47 assessment program," Rourke said, pacing in front of them. Like a hawk surveying potential prey. "This is not a school. This is not a simulation. This is real. You're not here because of who you know or what you studied. You're here because someone in our back offices saw something in you that didn't fit a mold. Congratulations. Don't let it go to your head. Only one of you is going to make it to the final testing stage. The rest, you'll be going home. Probably sore, possibly embarrassed, maybe wiser, hopefully all three." The tension was thick enough to butter toast with. Each candidate was assigned a call sign, not because it was necessary, but because it created distance, stripped away identities and egos, leaving only performance. Elise was dubbed Patchwork after a quick glance at her pieced-together flight log and the obvious fact that her flying background was cobbled from everything but the traditional route. A few smirked at the name. Elise didn't flinch. She kind of liked it. Patchwork wasn't an insult. It was a badge of invention. The trial begins. The first test was the Flight Aptitude Modular. As one of the instructors called it, the Sky Gauntlet. A real cockpit simulator with Zephyrtech's proprietary neural feedback gear, designed to sync with the pilot's stress responses and adjust challenges in real time. In short, the more nervous you got, the harder the sim would mess with you. A test of nerves as much as knowledge. The early favorites among the candidates took to it with precision. A guy named Ridge Call Sin Falcon scored almost perfectly on his first run. He was everything Elise wasn't: polished, confident, loaded with the kind of swagger that oozed out of his aviator sunglasses. When Elise's turn came, she sat down in the cockpit like it was an old friend. The wiring looked foreign. The tech absurdly advanced, but her hands didn't shake. She wasn't the fastest. She wasn't the most technical. But she did something one else did. She felt the plane. She talked to it, almost intuitively, as if she'd absorbed the soul of every flight manual she'd ever read. She guided it through an unexpected artificial storm, adjusted for crosswinds the system didn't predict, and landed safely while others were still reacting to alarms. One of the instructors raised an eyebrow. "How the hell did she do that?" he whispered to another. The response: "I think she listens to the sky." Living in the pressure cooker each day blurred into the next. A cycle of simulations, interviews, mechanical breakdown, problem solving, and yes, actual flight. Zephyrtech had a simplified prototype of the F-47 ready for hands-on maneuvering. It didn't have all the bells and whistles yet, but the shape, the feel-it, was close. The plane was a marvel, built with adaptive wings, predictive AI, and a cockpit interface that responded to voice commands, heart rate, and even pupil dilation. But it was also a diva. The aircraft didn't want to be flown. It wanted to be tamed. It had a learning curve sharper than a scalpel. And several candidates couldn't complete basic maneuvers without getting override alerts or triggering auto-safety protocols. Elise approached it like she had everything. In her life slow, curious, and with deep respect. Her first flight was rough. She stalled twice, almost clipped the tail on a loop. But she didn't panic. She recovered. She adapted. And she never stopped talking to the machine by the end of the week. Instructors began watching her flights with a sense of anticipation instead of pity. Even Rourke, who had all the emotional elasticity of a steel girder, allowed herself a rare, half-dashed smile. The doubt within but success is a fragile thing. Confidence, Eve, for the fiercest of souls can unravel in silence. Late one night, Elise sat alone on the edge of her bunk, watching dust particles dance in the glow of a bedside lamp. Her hands trembled slightly, though she wasn't cold. The voice in her head, the one she'd spent years learning to ignore, had come roaring back. "You don't belong here. They're better than you. One good flight doesn't make you a pilot. You're just a girl from nowhere with a cardboard cockpit and borrowed wings." She didn't cry. Elise Hart wasn't built for tears. But she did stare out the window and whisper to the night sky, "I know I'm not like them. I just hope the sky remembers me." What she didn't know was that outside, just around the corner, Commander Rourke was lighting a cigarette and heard every word. The final trial on, the last day, Zephyrtech pulled no punches. The final test was a real flight, low altitude, high pressure conditions, unexpected weather injections, and a mandatory mid-air systems override that would force pilots to fly without assistive. Each candidate would fly the same course. No second chances, no resets. Ridge went first. He flew well-tight turns, calculated risks, a near-perfect mechanical response. The instructors nodded, landed with the precision of a textbook diagram. Elise was last. The wind picked up as she taxied down the runway. Clouds loomed like sleeping beasts on the horizon. She closed her eyes, whispered, "It's just you and me now," and pulled back on the throttle. The flight began steady. She matched Ridge's time on the first leg. But then came the storm burst, harsher than anticipated. Lightning cracked. Across her periphery, instruments flickered. The override kicked in and the AI went dark. She was flying blind, but not alone. The sky didn't scare her. It called to her. Elise took control with grace, even as alarms screeched. She adjusted manually, riding the air like it was part of her. She banked into a spiral that had one of the engineers cursing under his breath in awe. She danced through turbulence like it was a waltz, and when she landed light as a feather, strong as steel, the tarmac fell silent. Then Rourke clapped. Just once, that was all it took. Wings that burn, hearts that soar, the morning after the final flight test. The skies above the Zephyratech proving grounds were clear for the first time in days. The kind of blue that felt earned, like it had been scrubbed clean by the storm Elise had flown through the day before. There was no ceremony scheduled, no dramatic drum roll or drawn-out announcement. This wasn't a game show. This was aerospace, practical, clinical, and almost aggressively unromantic, yet beneath that atmosphere of precision and protocol. Every candidate was quietly vibrating with anticipation, hope, and that gnawing fear of being passed over. Elise woke before dawn, not because of nerves, but because her body had been trained to rise with the sun back in Coalridge. She sat on the edge of her bed, fully dressed in her worn denim jeans and that same flannel shirt she'd brought from home, and waited. Around her, the room buzzed with tension as the others checked their emails, watched their phones like hawks, or paced in nervous circles. She didn't have a phone with her. Hers had been broken on the 3rd. Day after a not-so-graceful landing jarred it off a shelf. She hadn't bothered replacing it. Something in her told her this decision couldn't be found in a message anyway. At exactly 6:45 a.m. The speakers crackled with Commander Rourke's gravel-coated voice. All candidates report to Hangar 7. No delays. That was it. No hint, no clue. Just a summons. As they filed into the hangar, Elise noticed that someone had swept the floor spotless. The prototype of the F-47 gleamed under high halogen lights, the angles of its design sharper than any weapon, yet somehow elegant like a bird of prey frozen in time. Next to the plane stood Commander Rourke, clipboard in hand, looking as unreadable as always. The candidates lined up. Elise, without thinking, stood slightly off-center from the rest, as though she didn't quite believe she belonged in the same row. She wasn't trying to be humble. She just hadn't grown up in a world where people assumed they deserved the spotlight. Rourke's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. This week, each of you was tested beyond your comfort zone. We didn't want perfection. We didn't want textbook maneuvers. We wanted to see who could adapt, who could think, who could feel the aircraft, not just command it. She paused, letting her words settle over the group. We've made our decision. For a heartbeat, the only sound was the low hum of the aircraft's resting systems. Patchwork stepped forward. Elise blinked, unsure if she'd misheard. Ridge Falcon actually muttered, "What?" Under his breath, his jaw visibly tightening. Elise stepped forward slowly, boots echoing on the polished floor. Every inch of her aware of the heat of every gaze now fixed on her back, she stood in front of the commander, not knowing whether she was about to be praised or politely dismissed. Rourke handed her a small folder. Congratulations. You've been selected as the primary pilot for the next phase of the Future 47 program. You'll be flying it in live conditions, representing Zephyratech, as we move toward unveiling this technology to the Department of Defense and civil aviation sectors. You earned this not because of your background, but because you flew like the sky was your home. There was no applause, no confetti, just the stunned silence of a room full of people reordering their expectations. Maybe that was better. Because Elise didn't need a parade. She just needed that cockpit, that sky, and the chance to show the world what happens when grit meets gravity. Home and headlines the weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Elise was suddenly at the center of attention in a way that made her more anxious than elated. News articles sprouted up like weeds, each more sensational than the last. From house cleaner to sky queen, Elise Hart's meteoric rise, the patchwork pilot, who outsmarted AI Zephyratech's wildcard, the woman who beat the best reporters camped outside the test site. Aerospace forums debated whether her selection was a publicity stunt. Comment sections overflowed with praise, skepticism, and everything in between. One particularly snide commentator on a popular aviation blog called her a Pinterest-level pilot who got lucky. But Elise didn't care about the noise. She had only two goals: fly the F-47 better than anyone thought possible, and prove that heart, instinct, and relentless will could outperform algorithms and resumes. Back in Coalridge, her parents didn't even try to play it cool. Gordon printed out every article, laminated them, and posted them on the store's windows. Eula baked sky-themed cookies shaped like jets and clouds, and handed them out to anyone who asked about their daughter. Even the town's skeptical old-timers changed their tune. "Guess that girl knew what she was doing after all," Mr. Dillard said, chewing thoughtfully on a cookie shaped like an afterburner. The first official flight. The unveiling was scheduled to take place in front of a panel of high-ranking government officials, tech moguls, and aviation legends. A demonstration flight over the Mojave Desert coordinated down to the second, with every camera, radar, and telemetry system trained on Elise and the F-47. She had 10 minutes in the air, too. Prove that this machine, this miracle of mechanics, and AI could be trusted in real-life missions, with her as its voice and hands. In the minutes before takeoff, standing in her new flight suit, still a bit too long in the sleeves, but hers, Elise took a quiet moment alone beside the aircraft. She placed a hand gently on the cool metal and whispered, "We got here, and let's show them why." As the engine spun to life, a vibration traveled up her legs, through her chest, into her very breath. The F-47 wasn't just a plane, it was a language, a promise, and a partner. And today, they'd be speaking fluently. She lifted off smoothly, angling into a sharp ascent that stunned even the seasoned generals watching. Within seconds, she performed a series of tactical rolls, advanced evasion patterns, and a controlled stall recovery maneuver that had been deemed too ambitious by 2 previous test pilots. The sky opened for her like it remembered her name. Down below, Rourke didn't smile, but she did nod. "That," she said to one of the Zephyrot's executives, "is not just a pilot. That's an artist." Elise finished her flight with a silent flyby, so smooth and low that it fluttered the flags along the observation deck without triggering a single alarm. When she landed, a long, stunned silence met her wheels touching down. Then finally applause. Not the polite golf clap kind. This was the real thing, earned, honest, roaring. But Elise didn't hear it. She was too busy hugging the aircraft's frame, forehead pressed to the metal, whispering, "We did it." A fire that can't be bought. What followed was inevitable offers, endorsements, opportunities, interviews. Companies wanted her to speak at conferences. Universities wanted her to teach. Politicians wanted to be photographed with her. But Elise didn't accept most of them. She wasn't interested in becoming a brand. She didn't want her story commodified into some watered-down narrative about breaking barriers. She just wanted to fly. But she did accept one offer. Zephyrotech asked her to help design the next version of the F-47 one that would be accessible not just to top-tier pilots, but to a new generation of hopefuls, especially women and non-traditional learners. They wanted her to help rewrite what flight training could look like, building a program based on her journey. Resourceful, passionate, deeply human, Elise agreed on one condition. "I want a simulator like the one I built in my dad's barn," she said. "Every recruit should start by building something with their own hands. You learn more about flying with a hammer and a roll of duct tape than you ever will with a PhD." They laughed. But she wasn't joking. Storms over Coalridge. The time Elise Hart returned to Coalridge, the wheat fields had turned a muted gold, the kind of fading hue that signaled the end of harvest and the arrival of long shadows. The town itself hadn't changed much time. Moved through Coalridge like molasses in January. Same 2-lane roads, same rusted grain silos that scraped at the skyline like weary giants. Same weather-worn benches outside Gus's diner, where retirees swapped tales and old rumors. But what had changed utterly, irrevocably, was the way Coalridge looked at her. No longer just the girl who wanted to fly. Elise had become something of a folk hero. The news clippings from her flight with the F-47 were pasted in the hardware store's window next to a 241 drill bit sign. Her parents' house now received mail from places like Germany, India, Brazil, letters from young dreamers, especially girls who'd seen Elise's story and suddenly believed. In their own, Elise hadn't come home for a parade, though one had been offered twice, in fact. She turned it down gently both times. She wasn't built for fanfare. She came home for something far simpler, far more difficult. She needed to see where she began. It had been a full 6 months since her test flight had turned the Aviation world upside down, and her life had taken on a momentum that left little space to breathe. And now, as her next flight was being planned, this time across the Atlantic as part of Zephyrtech's joint demonstration with NATO, Elise wanted, even needed, to anchor herself again in the soil that once threatened to hold her down. But returning to your roots is never just a quiet retreat. It's more like opening a closet full of ghosts. It started with a letter, found tucked under her old bedroom door, sealed in an envelope with a name she hadn't heard in years, Lena Marshall. Lena had once been Elise's best friend, the kind of girl who had been louder, bolder, and more rebellious than Elise could ever manage. Where Elise was building cardboard cockpits and sketching clouds, Lena had been cutting class to sketch tattoos and talk about escaping town on the back of a motorcycle. They were opposite poles, but somehow they'd clicked. Letter was brief and shaky in its script. It spoke of trouble, of illness, of regret, of needing to talk. Elise sat on her old quilt for over an hour, just holding it, the words heavy like steel bolts in her hand. She hadn't thought of Lena in years. Not really. They'd parted ways after a brutal argument just after high school graduation. When Lena had mocked Elise's delusion of the sky, and Elise, in turn, had said something too cruel about Lena's then boyfriend and her dreams of leaving. It had never been resolved. Just one more dream set down and never picked up again. But now, Lena was asking to talk. And Elise couldn't bring herself to ignore it. A walk through ghosts, they met at the edge of town. Beneath the old train trestle that hadn't carried a single rail car since the Clinton administration, Lena was thinner now, older in the eyes. Then the body. The once vibrant shock of red hair was faded to copper and tucked under a plain cap. She walked with a slight limp, the result, she explained, of a car accident years earlier. The conversation started awkwardly, the way reunions often do when they're stitched over old wounds. But eventually Lena got to the point. I watched. You fly, she said, her voice gravel-coated but fragile beneath. Saw the videos. You were more than we ever dreamed. More than I ever believed someone from here could be. I was wrong, Elise, and I didn't want to leave this world without telling you that. Elise blinked, unsure whether to feel pride, sorrow, or guilt. I didn't want to believe it was possible either, she admitted. Not back then. But I couldn't stop wanting it, even when it felt stupid. They spoke for 2 hours. About the past. About how Lena's life had unraveled. In spurts and starts. About how dreams sometimes die, not because they're weak, but because no one believes they can live. Lena hadn't come looking for salvation, just honesty, just peace. When they finally hugged goodbye, it was the kind of embrace that doesn't erase the past, but softens it. Trouble on the horizon back at the test site 2 weeks later. The horizon was no longer clear. Zephyrtech's latest mission had hit a snag, and not a small one. A rival company, Skylogic Aeroworks, had accused Zephyrtech of stealing AI algorithms developed under a no-defunct defense contract. The allegation, while circumstantial, had ignited a political firestorm. Elise's next transatlantic flight, already being hyped as a showcase of the new tech, was now under review. There were whispers that the flight might be grounded permanently unless the company could provide full transparency and someone trustworthy to vouch for the integrity of the program. Suddenly, Elise wasn't just a pilot, she was a symbol. A figurehead for a technology that some wanted to claim was too good to be true. Rourke summoned her to headquarters. We've got a problem, she said without preamble. The board wants you to sit in front of a congressional subcommittee. Testify. They trust you more than anyone else. Frankly, so do I. But it won't be easy. You'll be under a microscope, and they'll come at you hard. Elise didn't flinch. What do you need me to say? The truth, Rourke said. Just the truth. You earned your place. They can't fake that. A sky worth defending. The hearing took place in D.C., beneath marble ceilings and fluorescent lights that had seen their share of drama. Elise sat at the long table, her hands clasped, her heart steady. Across from her were men and women who held her future, and the future of civilian AI aviation in their hands. They asked her about the F-47, about the training, about her background. One senator from Florida, skeptical and sharp-tongued, asked flatly, "What makes you a woman with no traditional credentials, qualified to fly a prototype aircraft that even military pilots struggled to handle?" Elise didn't smile. She didn't grandstand. She looked the senator in the eye and said, "Because I know what it means to work for something no one believes you deserve. I learned how to fly in a garage, built my first simulator from junk parts. I trained with farmers and retired controllers and broken manuals. I didn't inherit my skills. I earned them hour by hour. The plane didn't pick me because of a diploma. It picked me because I never gave up. And that was it. That moment. It's that truth." Even the skeptical senator noted just once, flying toward the future. The mission was cleared within the week, and as Elise prepared for her most ambitious flight, yet crossing the Atlantic in a new iteration of the F-47 equipped with experimental environmental sensors and auto-rescue capabilities, she carried more than just mission data and cutting-edge hardware. She carried Lena's letter tucked in her suit. She carried the weight of every letter from a kid in a town like Coalridge. And she carried the fire that no machine could replicate, because Elise's heart didn't just fly. She belonged in the sky. The edge of the blue, the Atlantic Ocean, has a way of reminding even the boldest souls just how vast the world really is. From the cockpit of the modified F-47X call sign Aquila Wanalese, Hart stared out at the endless cobalt expanse beneath her. Below was a world without roads or signs, without fences or borders, only a heaving canvas of water that seemed to go on forever. It was humbling. It was breathtaking. And it was exactly where she belonged. The mission had been crafted with surgical precision and ambition. Zephyr Tech's goal was no longer just about showcasing their prototypes. Agility, it was now about trust, reach, and real-world capability. This flight from Virginia's Langley Aerodrome to a private NATO base in Portugal was the public litmus test. The aircraft had been outfitted with a revolutionary climate sensing array designed to track atmospheric changes at granular levels, with the added goal of collecting transcontinental environmental data that could impact everything from transoceanic navigation to early weather anomaly detection. It wasn't just a test flight. It was a scientific gamble, a diplomatic gesture, and a publicity magnet all wrapped into one. But for Elise, despite all the pressure, this flight was personal. She'd trained harder than ever in the lead-up, not because she doubted her skills, but because she knew the stakes were no longer just about her. Every major publication that had doubted her after her rise now had analysts watching her trajectory. Political figures were staking their reputations on Zephyr Tech's success. And every kid who had written her a letter telling her how they, too, wanted to break into the sky was watching. So she flew, not for spectacle, but with the quiet, steady grace that had become her signature. The F-47X responded to her like it knew her heartbeat. Even the engineers, watching the telemetry feed from control stations, noted the synchronicity between pilot and plane. Elise wasn't flying the aircraft. She was moving with it. She wasn't fighting the air. She was part of it. The first leg of the flight was smooth, even elegant. As she passed into the jet stream, she monitored the readouts on her AI display, occasionally adjusting altitude to optimize fuel and signal feedback. The onboard A, nicknamed Mira, was functioning beautifully, predicting turbulence before it hit, adjusting yaw with subtle feedback pings, and processing oceanic data faster than expected. The future of aviation wasn't just in motion, it was soaring. But the Atlantic, as always, had plans of its own. The hidden front somewhere between the halfway mark in European airspace, the weather shifted in a way that didn't align with the projections. The satellites hadn't caught it. MERS data. Sweep gave a slight uptick in upper atmospheric ice density, but no red flags. Yet Elise, with her hands on the controls and her eyes scanning the horizon, felt something ancient in her bones, a tension in the wind, a vibration in the sky. Something was off. Within 30 minutes, She was flying into a storm that hadn't existed on any weather model. Not the violent kind that threw lightning like javelins, but a far more complex beast-in atmospheric shear wave with unexpected magnetic interference. The plane began experiencing rapid sensor fluctuations. Mira issued a quiet but steady warning. Instrument confidence level dropping below threshold. Navigational override recommended. Most pilots would have pulled back or activated emergency reroute procedures. But Elise Hart had grown up in winds so strong it could knock the shingles off her father's shop roof. She had flown through storms that chewed up birds and spat them into different time zones. What she hadn't done, however, was ignore a feeling this strong, this visceral, that something more was happening here than just weather, rather than fight the storm. She leaned into it, descended slightly, adjusted her airspeed manually, and disengaged one layer of Maya's automation. She needed to feel what was coming. She wasn't just navigating, she was interpreting. And then she saw it, or rather didn't, for a stretch of 20 miles. Her external cameras showed nothing, just static. No visual feed, no infrared readings, no atmospheric temperature markers. She was flying blind, but it wasn't just sensor failure. It was a void. An eerie, silent corridor of cloud and wind that felt more like flying into a memory than a storm. Instinct kicked in. Elise relied on touch, not sight. She trusted what no AI could replicate: intuition sharpened by failure, faith bolstered by hardship, and a lifetime of listening to what others ignored. She didn't panic. She translated the turbulence like a second language. Minutes stretched into hours, and then, just like that, the void was behind her. Her instruments came alive again. Myra's systems recalibrated. The plane stabilized. Blue returned to the sky, and Elise, alone at the edge of the unknown, exhaled for the first time in nearly 30 minutes. Grounded applause when she landed in Portugal. There was no fanfare waiting on the runway, just a handful of tight-lipped officials and a control team that looked more relieved than celebratory. Yet the moment Elise stepped out of the cockpit, a technician handed her a weather analysis report. "Ma'am," he said, in a voice that didn't match his youth, "what you just flew through. We've never seen anything like it. You recorded the first data on an uncharted magnetic storm cell. NOAA and the ESA are already calling it a possible anomaly zone." Elise raised an eyebrow. "You're telling me I flew through a ghost in the sky? More like a bruise in the atmosphere?" The data collected from her flight was more than just valuable light, was unprecedented. Whatever had happened in that void was going to change how weather was tracked over oceans. Some of the readings had already gone to NATO's Environmental Monitoring Unit, and quietly, almost too quietly, a few people in classified corners of the aerospace world began whispering that Elise hadn't just proven her worth as a pilot, she'd discovered something. Recognition and resistance. What followed in the days after was a bizarre mix of celebration and skepticism. Scientific institutions requested her data. Journalists clamored for interviews. Conspiracy theorists on social media began speculating that she'd flown into a wormhole or some kind of temporal disturbance, and, naturally, the traditional aerospace community began to grumbling, insisting that a pilot with only a few hundred logged hours shouldn't be the face of a revolution. But Commander Rourke, watching the chaos unfold from Zephyradic headquarters, was unmoved. "Elise doesn't need to prove herself," she told the press. "She's already made the sky change shape. That's not luck. That's evolution." But for Elise, the attention was overwhelming. What began as a mission of performance had become a beacon of disruption. She hadn't just challenged tradition, she'd appended it, and as much as she believed in what she had done, there was a heaviness to the fame, a weight she hadn't wanted but couldn't walk away from. That night, sitting alone on the rooftop of the Portuguese NATO base, Elise looked up at the stars. The sky felt closer now, not because of altitude, but because of understanding. And somewhere between those stars and the storm that had hidden itself in silence, she realized something even deeper than flight. This wasn't about breaking ceilings or rewriting rules. This was about reshaping belief. She whispered to the stars, just loud enough for her soul to hear, "If the sky can change, then so can everything else." Returned to the storm 2 months after the Atlantic crossing that had stunned the aviation world. Elise Hart found herself staring at a classified report inside Zephyrtek's secure hangar, its contents more surreal than any flight path she'd ever flown. Across its pages were lined graphs, atmospheric anomaly reports, and preliminary satellite recon that confirmed what Elise had known in her bones, that what she'd flown through over the Atlantic wasn't just an odd weather pocket. It was something entirely new. Scientists were calling it a magneto-atmospheric instability zone, a corridor of ultra-altitude turbulence where electromagnetic fields spiked erratically, strong enough to confuse sensors, disorient AI systems, and possibly, according to early theories, interfere with the human vestibular system in ways not yet understood. What no one could explain? Though no AI, no algorithm, not even the meteorologists at ESA, was how Elise had navigated through it unscathed. Mir's data showed that other pilots, even with more hours in military training, would have struggled to avoid catastrophic failure. Elise had, by every mathematical model, defied the probabilities. Her instincts had outperformed technology. And because of that, the world's attention wasn't just on the data anymore, it was on her. And it was about to get heavier. The U.S. Department of Defense, along with an elite multinational aerospace advisory board, had requested a return. Flight into the zone. But not just any flight. They wanted a full-spectrum manned mission, with real-time satellite relays and a team of top scientists monitoring every second. The F-47X would be outfitted with even more sensitive instrumentation. The goal: to study, to learn, and to find out whether these mysterious zones were anomalies or beginnings of a much larger shift in the planet's upper atmosphere. It would be the most dangerous flight yet, and naturally, they wanted Elise to lead it. Her first reaction wasn't excitement. It was silence. For a long time, Elise stood at the edge of the hangar, staring at the fuselage of the plane that had carried her dreams. She traced its metal edge with her fingers, as if asking it silently for an answer. She had always believed in the sky, not because it was beautiful, but because it had never lied to her. But this wasn't just flight. This was pushing against the edge of something unknown, something possibly beyond what anyone had the language to define. This wasn't a storybook. It wasn't an underdog tale anymore. This was history asking her to pick up the pen. She didn't say this right away. She returned to Coalridge. The quiet before the flight. Coalridge in the fall was always lovely in a homespun way. Leaves turned to rust-colored blankets. The hardware. Stores' windows steamed from pots of cider brewing in the back. And people nodded to Elise now like they were greeting the town's own version of a legend, which made her feel both warm and deeply unsettled. Fame had its charm, but Coalridge had its roots. Roots didn't always play nicely with wings. She visited her parents, helped her dad replace a broken rain gutter, sat on the porch with her mom drinking tea while the wind tossed the tree branches into a lazy dance. And at night, when the stars were clear, she walked out to the barn behind the store where her first simulator still stood in a dusty corner. Preserved like a relic of stubborn ambition, she sat inside it just once, letting her fingers glide over the cracked joystick and mismatched switches. It smelled of wood, glue, and determination. It was there that she wrote the answer to Zephyrtek. 4 words: let's finish the map. Into the unknown, the flight nicknamed Project Eoluz was unlike anything in modern aviation history. Elise wasn't alone in the mission this time. Other pilots were selected to fly support craft alongside her, though their paths would not cross into the heart of the storm zone. A high-altitude weather balloon array would mirror the mission from above, and dozens of stations around the globe were set to collect telemetry. As the launch day approached, interviews were declined, press appearances canceled. Elise wanted no distractions. She spoke only with the engineers, the flight techs, and occasionally Commander Rourke, who now served as her primary operations coordinator. Rourke never said much, but on the eve of the flight, she handed Elise a an old snapshot of the first F-47 test crew. Years before Elise ever touched the controls, "None of us got here alone," Rourke said, her voice softer than usual. "So when you're out there, remember, you're not chasing glory, you're chasing knowledge. And there's no purer flight than that." The next morning, Elise stepped into the cockpit of the F-47X Plus and evolved. Lena, more intuitive machine, with reinforced magnetic shielding and AI protocols tailored entirely to her neurological signature. It didn't feel like climbing into a plane. It felt like returning home. The flight launched without incident. She passed into the jet stream, then past the edge of the last weather model, and then to the blue. The eye of silence this time, the zone did not creep. It greeted her, like an old friend. The void returned not as darkness, but as absence. No readings, no temperature. No sound but the gentle hum of the plane's core systems. The sky became a liquid blue, the kind of blue you'd expect in a painting, not in life. Time seemed to dilate. Myra's voice grew distant, quieter until finally, it vanished altogether. Inside this silent storm, Elise didn't feel panic. She felt clarity. Her heartbeat was steady. She began documenting what she could: voice logs, manually toggled instruments, handwritten notes. But it was instinct, not data, that guided her next move. She angled the plane gently, shifting to a glide, allowing herself to feel the currents. It wasn't wind. It wasn't gravity. It was something else, as though the sky itself had become a living body, and she was tracing its breath, and in that breath she found something else, an echo, not sound, but presence, as if her entry into the zone had triggered not interference, but response. She didn't claim to understand it, but she did know one thing. The sky had changed, and it was listening. Legacy written in blue when she emerged from the zone nearly 50 minutes later. The telemetry systems roared back to life. Satellites pinged, air traffic control re-engaged, and the command team, who had watched her signal all but vanish, broke into spontaneous applause. The data she brought back was unprecedented. An entire new category of atmospheric behavior was cataloged that day. Her handwritten notes alone would take scientists months to decode. Elise Hart had just expanded the known map of the sky. But the thing she valued most? The confirmation that her instincts hadn't just been right, they had been essential. She hadn't followed the sky. She'd taught it to trust her. In the weeks that followed, Zephyrtech offered her a new position: lead test pilot, director of future flight. She accepted, but on the condition that they also build a school, one open to pilots from all walks of life. No GPA requirements, no wealth barriers, just passion, grit, and a willingness to learn from the wind. They named it the Patchwork Academy in Coalridge. It became known not as the place Elise Hart came from, but as the place that birthed the future of flight. Years later, in an archived interview, Elise was asked what it meant to be the first human to map a storm that didn't exist until she flew into it. She paused, then said, "I wasn't the first. I was just the first to listen long enough to hear it speak." The end.